Brewbound exclusive.
A couple weeks back, Brewbound got the chance to sit down with the founders of Mystic Brewing. We met them at their warehouse in Chelsea, Massachusetts. Here's what they had to say. So, tell us how you guys got started.
How did you get started?
I was homebrewing for ever since graduate school, so we're on like almost 14 years now, and got most interested in the Belgian styles because of the focus on fermentation, because I was working professionally in microbial fermentation, so fermentation scientist, and the way of Belgian brewing is most interesting on that side because of the multiple, the spontaneous fermentations, the multiple fermentations with bacteria and all the things that happen in lambic brewing, and the small amounts of that in other styles, and especially Saison. It really led from the Abbey styles to discovering Saison, which just, when you start to brew Saisons, you realize that it's like a whole new, it's almost like here's beer and here's Saison, and then here's lambics. It's all, the variety within that is gigantic, and so there's a lot of opportunity to explore and like come up with new beers, and also just sort of express like things about where you're from in Saison, because if you go out and use some of the microbes that are out there, and brew the way the Belgians do, which is just the old way of brewing, you end up with really interesting and unique results based on where you are. So Saison sort of expresses that, and definitely the more challenging but incredibly unique and interesting lambics are also. So I went from homebrewing the IPAs and whatnot to going up to these Saisons and stuff, and I was working in microbial fermentation and industrial fermentation, and I went to, I actually went on a honeymoon. My wife and I went to Belgium. We brewed some Belgian beers that were very well received by the family. I always take that with a grain of salt, but it was encouraging. And came back and started writing a business plan, and I went to the Craft Brewers Conference here in Boston, and I sat down next to this guy, and it turns out that he went to school in the Mystic Valley at Tufts, and then he was a Fulbright scholar, and then decided to become did some importing and exporting in New York City, and then decided to follow his passion, which is brewing. And he really wanted to get involved in a startup and help start a brewery, and wanted to move back up here.
So that's the reason for the Mystic name?
It actually came from getting stuck on Route 16, the Mystic Valley Parkway. My wife actually said, Mystic would be a really good name. And then I have some roots in the area, some ancestors that helped found towns in the area. So we're like, that's a really good name. But the Mystic really turns out, it also, what struck us, my wife is also a fermentation scientist, and what struck us was like how brewing used to be a Mystic process. They had no idea there was any yeast. So it's kind of a play on the fact that today we can do it probably better than they did, or at least more consistently than they did back then. But it's really with a lot of knowledge and information that we have today, but we're trying to like recapture the Mystic way of brewing. So that's how it all rolls together.
And of course, the brewery is in Chelsea, which is in the Mystic Valley, basically. So
the Mystic Bridge is right there.
Yeah.
Tell us about your unique contract brewing process. From what we understand, you will be brewing at another location and then transporting the wort back to your warehouse to ferment.
Well, clearly it takes a lot of money to open up a brewery, and a huge chunk of that change is the actual brew house. So one way to sort of get around having to produce all that capital for the brew house was to use somebody else's, which is a common practice to do contract brewing. But this way, since we're brewing the wort at another location, we can bring it back here and we can ferment with whatever bugs, wild yeasts, of course regular standard brewing yeasts, stuff that we kind of find in our own backyards. We can kind of get, pretty experimental with it without having to freak out the contract brewer. We're not tying up their tank space because we have our own spot, and we're able to bottle and basically package it the way we want. So.
What styles are you going to make, and which ones will be barrel aged?
It's pretty simple. There's pretty much 3 types of beer that we would do, and there's this base saison that we've worked out together. We brewed. He did a large amount of the refinement on. We did over 40 different recipes, tweaking that until we got this base saison down. And then what we started to do at home, experimenting, is to throw fruit in there. And so we'll probably try herbs and stuff, but so there'll be variations off of that. Especially we have the produce market right here, so we have access to lots of great ingredients. And so take that. So we'll have just the flagship base saison, and then fruit variations, and that also is similar to the sour beer making, like in Belgium, the lambic making, where you have your base. We'll do the same thing, have a base lambic type thing. We can't really call it a lambic. We have to call it, I don't know what to call it, bustambic or something, but we'll have that base sour beer, and we're gonna try to set up all the barrels, a 3-year aging program, and then we'll do blending from there, and again, put different fruit in there to make variations, just like is traditionally done with the true Belgian lambic. So, and then the third thing is just high gravity brewing that will have just really experimental, trying to make up cordials that you would drink in really small amounts, and it's really all about the flavor and pairings and just really intense stuff. So that'll also, these things are phased out. We can do saison right away. Sour beers are going to take a while to get the program going, and then the these really high gravity cognac type things are going to take quite a while to get that program up and running, maybe 2 or 3 years. So.
Tell us about harvesting yeast from literally your own backyard.
Yeah, we're kind of experimenting with some wild yeasts, and I'm from Maine originally, and central Maine, rural, lots of trees, meadows. So my parents have blueberry bushes and a bunch of fruit up there, and we brought back a bunch of blueberries, and we were able to isolate the yeast basically living off of the skin of the blueberries, and we're able to make some interesting beer styles. It's something we're still refining, but we have one yeast that we have kind of isolated, and it's doing some really interesting stuff for us, and we're definitely going to play around with that a little more. And we've also experimented, isolated some yeast from local Massachusetts plums and peaches.
And Somerville grapes.
Somerville grapes, right? So you can basically just about find yeast on anything.
The thing about it is it's very difficult to, the Seine Valley in Belgium is known for, you can make lambic just out of the air. In the reality, those breweries have this ecosystem that's developed over a very long time. And so these things are wild, and we're not just isolating what people usually call wild yeast with this Brettanomyces that makes that barnyard type flavor, but actually Saccharomyces cerevisiae that will make a true beer that sort of is in the Belgian style. They're fruity. That's why people haven't used these kinds of strains before, at least in American brewing. But now that people are going back to this way of brewing the Belgian style, now that's very appropriate to go look for these things, and they come out really interesting. But the thing is, this was somewhat inspired by a number of things that other breweries were doing, but especially Father Theodore from Chimay. He clearly, if you look, he found the yeast that they use in a similar way. And he says the same thing that we'll tell you, which is that you really have to hunt through, you have to isolate and look through tons and you have to do hundreds of little pico fermentations and to find the good ones, the ones that have good head retention properties, that taste good, that don't over attenuate and make a very, very dry beer, like overly dry. So you really have to hunt, and then it's almost like breeding from that point to get like your house strain out of that. Most strains that people use today they have sort of an ancestry back to, in the United States, have an ancestry back to Europe, and they've become house strains just as they've adapted to that particular brewery. So that's like the next stage for us. First it's just to find the new strains.
When will you guys be up and running and producing beer, and what's the plan of attack for getting it out into the marketplace?
Well, we're still waiting for our license from the TTB. So, federal and state approvals, basically, and that could be a few months from now. It's always sort of a variable, depending on state agencies and federal agencies. But our plan of attack is, our Saison's going to be our flagship. That's the recipe that we've been kind of refining for this whole time, sort of on our smaller system, our homebrew Sabco system. And
which is an old 10-gallon system.
Yep. But we've been able to do some good stuff. We're able to, actually do proper mash, procedures and everything. So it's we have temperature-controlled fermenters, so we're able to really dial in, the parameters that we want. And we're gonna, launch it mostly. We're gonna start off with 750 ml Belgian-style bottles, champagne bottles, really, with cork and caps. So we're mainly going to do those to start off with. We'll probably have some draft accounts, but not much to start off with.
Yeah, one of the principles is to do everything in its best form. So Saison is really quite best in a bottle like this, and the reason is because some people think that the cork is like just for looks or something like that, but in fact it's because these kind of beers tend to be really highly carbonated, well, a lot more than English styles, which can be actually quite low carbonation. And this kind of closure allows you to get up to 3.5 volumes of carbonation, volumes of CO2, whereas like an English one can be as low as 2, maybe even lower. So it's actually the best closure for the purpose. So at Saison, they tend to be the most enjoyable when they are that highly carbonated. And you really can't do that on draft. It's very hard. There's good Saisons on draft, but to do what we've optimized, we can't really do it. This is the right format for it. We might do another type of Saison. It won't be this main Saison. I'm pointing. But
the empty Saison, right?
Yeah, the empty Saison, the demonstration bottle.
Yeah.
But then, when we look at a draft, we're going to think about what beers, are going to be really good on draft, and they may not even go in a bottle. So, whatever the best format for it is, that's how we'll, want to put it out there.
Cool. Well, this is pretty exciting to see you guys starting up and taking some time out of our day and your day to come over here and check out what you guys are doing. So, thanks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah.
For more information about Mystic Brewing, visit their website at mystic-brewery.com or follow updates on their progress at brewbound.com.